Hello, everyone. Good morning from the Netherlands. Good afternoon to those in Saigon. And thank you all. You have come in great numbers to join our webinar on renewable energy, specifically solar energy in Vietnam, challenges and opportunities. I would like to thank everyone that has put so much effort in making this webinar happen. I will speak more about the sequence of speakers later. And also thank you to our co-hosts of CEEC, GBA and ICHAM. A few housekeeping things that you must be aware of after such a long time of participating in digital events. Turn off your camera, mute your microphone, type any questions you have in chat, and raise your hands if you want to say something during the Q&A session. And on our end, we will do our best to note your risen hand, which is also an art in itself. Lastly, a recording, webinar documents will be sent to your email, and we will also make sure that the information is readily available for you. So there's no need to make screenshots. We will send everything to you. Okay, so the next slide should have the program of this webinar. See, thank you very much, team. Well, so we've started. This is the welcome and introduction. My name is Guido van Rooij. I am the host of this webinar of the DBAV. I'm the executive director. I'm very honored to have such an interesting panel of speakers with us that have all prepared very detailed presentations that are still very engaging, starting with an opening remark from Mr. Christoph Prommesberger, Deputy Head of Mission at the Dutch Embassy. He will speak about, let's say, the view of the Dutch Embassy on the renewable energy sector in Vietnam. Then secondly, there is Chris Weinberg. He's the Strategic Sales Director at Shire, and he will hold a bit short introduction on the renewable energy developments, investment trends, and knowing your partners. Then how we are. Then we dive into solar rooftop details with Clotilde Deneve. She is the Sales Director at Shire. And then last but not least, we have Mr. Oliver Mosman. He was available, and we're very happy to have him to speak about Vietnam government policies on rooftop solar energy. The structure of the webinar is as such that we have a few moments for questions after each speaker that will be moderated by me. And that will be one or two questions that may pop up in chat or that you may have prepared or that you may have asked before the webinar. As you can see, we have reserved about 30 minutes for question and answer. Seems like a bit much, but we have an hour and a half to go through the whole program. So that will be the structure. So if you have any questions, please ask them in chat and I'll make sure to handle them. If we can't get to your question, we will make sure that your question is handled after the webinar, and then we will send you an email and make sure that that is also shared to everybody in an overviewable way. Okay, so I think that is the introduction for now. Christoph, I think it's time to put the spotlight on you and hear your remarks.
Thank you very much, Guido, for your introduction. And I noticed that you are joining the webinar from the Netherlands. Me personally, I am joining from the beautiful city of Ninh Binh in Vietnam, where I'm currently in quarantine in a hotel. And hopefully I will be released this weekend and I can go back home to Hanoi. So thank you very much for this opportunity to give a brief introduction on the renewable energy landscape and situation in Vietnam. Can I have the next slide, please, Jen? So maybe to start, I should mention something about Vietnam and climate change. You might be aware that Vietnam is becoming rapidly one of the top polluters in the world, currently number 13. And that is very much a result of the very strong economic growth, particularly in manufacturing, that Vietnam has been going through in the past years. So therefore, Vietnam still considers coal necessary for its energy demand, which is doubling in the coming years. And in the current power development plan, Vietnam is planning to build 3 new coal-fired power plants. And on top of that, Vietnam will also need to import more energy, not only hydro, but also coal to fire those power plants. So far, there is no date yet from Vietnam for zero emissions. And if you look at the current development of the power production in Vietnam and the CO2 emission, there will be probably only in 2040 the CO2 emissions of Vietnam would peak. At the same time, though, we also see a very strong growth of renewable energy, and that is the good news of today. Particularly in the last 2-3 years, it's been growing very, very strong, and solar has been booming. Hence, of course, why we are having this webinar today. Next slide, please, Jen. So what you can see in this slide is that the share of renewable energy in the total energy mix of Vietnam is growing. Particularly solar, of course, but you also see that wind energy is expected to grow more. But still, there will be, next slide, coal will remain the largest source of power in Vietnam by far. So unfortunately, also for the coming 10 to 20 years, this will be the picture, and we will certainly have situations, many days in a year, where we cannot go or exercise outside because of the air quality. But then back to the good news. The rooftop solar has been going through the roof in the past year. And of course, that is attracting a lot of attentions from companies who would like to benefit from that development, and rightfully so. Next, please. Because so far we see that particularly the large Dutch multinational companies are leading in the energy transformation in Vietnam. For instance, Heineken has committed to being CO2 neutral in 2030, and you see similar commitments with other large multinational companies. But that doesn't mean that this is a game only for multinational companies. Also for SMEs, there are possibilities. But before the other speakers dive into that, I would also like to broaden our discussion a bit on offshore wind. Because as you know, the Netherlands is very big in offshore wind. Not so much in the turbines, but in construction. But that is only taking off quite slowly in Vietnam so far. While Vietnam actually could be an offshore wind superpower. If you look at the coastline and the quality of the wind, there is a huge potential there. But at the moment, still, the grid is the elephant in the room. As some of you might have learned, Vietnam's grid has been struggling with the huge surge of solar in the past years. And EVN so far doesn't seem ready to manage a huge influx of offshore wind power. So that is something that a lot of work needs to be done still. And where also massive investments will be required to build the infrastructure for renewable energy in Vietnam. Not only the grid, but for instance, also energy ports near to the offshore wind parks. For that, massive investments would be required in order to avoid pictures like you see now, like the floodings that we've seen in Vietnam in the past year, that also are one of the impacts of climate change, which we are, of course, trying to avoid or mitigate, at least with the energy transition that we're in at the moment. The Netherlands government, in order to stimulate the energy transition, has started the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And out of this fund, projects for climate adaptation or mitigation can be funded. So our partners for the implementation of this fund in Vietnam are WWF and SNV. So in case you have any programs or initiatives or ideas that contribute to the climate adaptation or mitigation of Vietnam, then please contact WWF or SNV. I will share the contact information with Guido so we can share it with all participants and explore together with them if your initiative qualifies for funding from the Dutch Climate Fund. Because in order to make this energy transition work, we need public-private partnerships. And that's why I'm very happy that so many of you join in this webinar today, because we're all in this together to make this energy transition happen and to avoid the negative consequences of climate change. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all a very good webinar.
Thank you very much, Christophe, for your remarks and setting the scene for the rest of this webinar. I would like to ask you one question that has been asked in advance to the crowd and from the crowd, and it is: could renewable energy really be an alternative for Vietnam despite the underdeveloped infrastructure system?
Of course it can. But as I highlight in my presentation, in order to make that happen, massive investments in the grid, for instance, and other infrastructure would be required. There are several international partners like the World Bank, FMO, and the ADB who would be willing to finance such developments. But so far, the Vietnamese government is reluctant to accept loans to upgrade the grid. But hopefully, together with both the public and the private sector and international partners, we can, in cooperation with our Vietnamese partners, push for this development.
Thanks very much. Thank you for reconfirming that, because indeed you mentioned that. When you set the scene, you also set some limitations, but it's important that we keep highlighting that we're speaking of a massive opportunity for both solar and wind. So thanks for confirming that. Over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Guido.
Yeah, you're welcome. Over to our next speaker, Mr. Chris Weinberg, Strategic Sales Director at Shire Oak International. Former co-founder and director at Eurocham, if I understand correctly, and I believe you also had a role at DBAV, Chris?
Long time ago, Guido, but it was fun. Yes, correct.
Fantastic. Well, we're very happy to have you. It is not often that you speak to a former chairman of the DBAV, if I recall correctly. So it's fantastic that we see each other in this webinar. Chris, you will hold a short introduction on solar rooftop systems as a long-term partnership and relationship, development, investments, origins and criteria, knowing your partner, and also a short introduction, I believe, on Clotilde. I will give the floor to you, and it will take about 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm curious to hear what you're going to say.
Thank you very much, Guido, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Lovely to be here. I'd like to acknowledge the fine introduction of Mr. Christoph Pommersberger of the Netherlands Embassy. I thought it was a very insightful presentation. And the presenters after me, Miss Clotilde Denève of Shire Oak and Mr. Oliver Mosman of Duane Morris, they will hold very exciting and insightful presentations in a short while. My presentation is going to be very, very brief. Recently, I completed a hospitality project in Phu Yen province in Vietnam, and I've been developing that since 2016, and now returned to my original and beloved base of Ho Chi Minh City. When the Phu Yen project was about to be completed, there was only one activity that I wanted to return to, and that is renewable energy. I'm very happy and fortunate that my wish materialized seamlessly and that I now am part of the excellent Shire Oak international team. The topic of this very short talk is maybe not so much highlighted in the industry because it's more of a common sense business issue that does not directly focus on the promotional, scientific, and legal aspect of the sustainability business. Nevertheless, in the young and impressive, fast developing renewables market in Vietnam, you may agree that it is an essential aspect of the industry and its growth potential. I'm talking about the know your partner aspect of the industry and the main features related thereto. Sustainability has evolved from an idealistic concept into a bankable element of business, now familiar to entrepreneurs, producers, and conglomerates all over the world, including, of course, Vietnam. The sustainability awareness of the consumers in the mature Western markets is one of the main drivers behind the renewables revolution. It is therefore essential to have a deep understanding of the nature of these drivers and where they will go in the future, and what it means for Vietnam and the demands associated with that drive. Obviously, one of the most popular and direct ways to meet your sustainability targets is to meet the demands of these consumers is to engage in renewable energy at production level here in Vietnam. Solar rooftop systems is one of the most practical, effective, and cost-efficient ways to successfully engage in renewable energy and its continuous benefit. To get a solar system up and running, the following steps are involved. Number 1, development. 2, investment. 3, implementation. 4, operation. And then finally, 5, the token transfer of the system to the user. Now, there are contractors who only focus on building the systems. There are also developers who sell the system after it has been built. And there are even investors that have short or to medium-term exit strategies. But there are also companies like Shire Oak that specialize in taking care of the whole life cycle of the system from beginning to end. Importantly, that includes the total investment involved up to the transferring of the system to you for free, usually after 15 to 20 years. Therefore, and this is really important, the relationship between you and the investor is for 15 to 20 years. That means that the investment origins and criteria, as well as the integrity of the company that you are dealing with, needs to be clear and properly safeguarded. Who is behind the company you are dealing with? Where does the money come from? What are the motivations and backgrounds involved? What is the track record of these investors? Those are all vital questions. In the case of Shire Oak International, there is a small number of ultra-reliable investors who are committed and who have a long-standing solid reputation in the sustainable energy world. They have experience in the mature Western solar power markets and know the long-term issues involved. They also know the current and future trends of the consumers driving the sustainability demands. As such, they have imposed on us stringent, best practice-based investment criteria to engage in projects. These criteria are designed to guarantee solid performance of the system throughout the life cycle and a smooth relationship with you, the system host, while safeguarding excellent financial returns for the partnership project with you. To conclude, I'd like to say that like in so many other businesses that have a long-term life cycle and involve an equally long-term relationship, alignment with the solid partner is critical. Therefore, please make sure that you know your investment partner in your solar power system. The future depends on it. That is the end of my little presentation. I will now be followed by Clotilde Denève, who is a sales director of Shire International. And Clotilde will go into the more into the details of solar power and the nitty-gritty of what is involved. And I thank you very much for your attention and wish you a good webinar after this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. And Clotilde, before you start, let me just ask one stringent question. Chris, who are your current investor partners? Can you highlight a few so that we know the profile of those?
Okay, thank you for that question. It's a very good one. We have, for instance, the climate fund managers, CFM, who are a Dutch-based investor, and they are 50% owned by FMO, which is the institution that Christophe already referred to before. They're very experienced in the sustainable energy world, and they have been involved in it a long term. One of the other investors is the Nord Fund, and I think most of the people involved in the renewable energy markets in Europe and the Western markets are very well acquainted with them, and they have a fantastic track record in the business.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for highlighting that. And indeed, Climate Fund Managers is well known. Actually, they participated in a business matchmaking session last year with DBAV. So I think I know who you were talking about. Okay, Clotilde, over to you. Thank you, Chris, for your insightful presentation on, you call it common sense. Others may call it important strategic choices. Who are you going to do it with, and what are the boundaries and the things to pay attention to? So that is a very good, I think, introduction for what you are going to say, Clotilde, because you are going to talk about solar and what it means for your business to install all that, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, I'm gonna give a quick overview of the renewable energy in the world, and then I'm gonna jump a little bit more into Vietnam and what's going on. And then obviously I was finished with presenting what kind of solutions are available within the country and what Shire is doing here. Let me share my presentation.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, let's start then. Okay, so first, thank you very much for the organization. Thank you for your trust and having us here. It's a really exciting opportunity. I saw a few of my competitors joining the room, so I better get my presentation good. So I'm going to start with talking about what's happening in globally as a trend for renewable energy. So this is obviously becoming a massive trend, especially in 2020. We saw it in Vietnam a lot, the renewable energy and the demand grew a lot last year, and this is not going to stop at all. So just to give you a few numbers, In 2020, the share of renewable in the global electricity generation went from 27 to 29% and is actually forecasted to become over 30% by 2021. So considering that the electricity generation is growing every year because there is a growing demand of electricity, having the share of renewable that is getting bigger every year is a very good sign. That obviously come from a few different factors. The biggest one, I would say, is the Paris Climate Agreement that's been signed in 2016. 160 parties signed it. Vietnam is part of it. And basically that means that we have to limit the global warming below 1.5, preferably 2. Sorry, I realize there's a mistake in my number on the presentation. So below 2 degrees Celsius comparing to before industrialization. In order to do that, we have to change completely the way that we are doing business. And obviously, renewable energy has a strong role to play in that. So it's very nice to see that there is some change and that renewable energy is growing, that there's a strong demand. It's also led by the fact that the cost of renewable energy has massively dropped over the last few years. So just to give you a few numbers, we went from $100 per megawatt hour on onshore wind to 44, and for solar, because this is the topic of today, it's even bigger. We were at 300 per megawatt hour, and we are now at $50. So that basically means that solar is economic. It's beneficial in most parts of the world. It's extremely beneficial in Vietnam. It's working really well because we have a fantastic climate here. I will go a little bit more into detail later in the presentation. But obviously we have that combination of a growing demand. It makes sense financially, and because it makes sense financially, we see that a lot of investors and we see that the financial world is coming and wants a share of the pie. So last year in 2020, for the very first time, clean energies companies actually raised more money than fossil fuel company through public offering. So again, that's a very strong sign to see that this trend is not only growing, but it's not going anywhere. It's going to keep growing. People are realizing that we need to do something about the climate. People are realizing that we have to clean up our energy mix. Public are asking big companies to do something. Consumers are becoming more and more, are paying more and more attention to what big international companies are doing. And we can see the repercussion of that in Vietnam, and that's happening right now with solar rooftop. It's a very good thing what's happening with the private sector. So basically, private sector are taking responsibility for their carbon footprint, and a lot of them are being part of coalition, are signing some pacts. So the biggest one is the Fashion Pact. A lot of them are part of initiative. And a lot of them are committed to change the way they are making business and the way they are producing their goods. This is especially important when you know that 100 companies in the world are responsible for 2/3 of the annual industrial carbon emission globally. So that means that if we get all of those big international companies to do something and to commit to it, we see the change that we saw in 2020 and that we hope to keep seeing in the coming years. We can't really do anything without involving big international company, and we also cannot do anything without involving emerging markets. And that's why Vietnam has a really strong role to play in this energy transition, because 80% of the growth in electricity demand from now to 2040 is expecting to come from emerging market countries. So markets like Vietnam, it's especially the case in a market like Vietnam, because there is not only a strong urbanization, but there is a massive industrialization. So we saw that on the first presentation. I'm really sorry, Christopher, I won't pronounce your family name because I don't want to say anything wrong. So I'm just going to keep it to that. But we saw it on the presentation of Christopher at the beginning. Huge industrialization of Vietnam obviously mean a huge need of electricity. What's happening in Vietnam and what is happening in a lot of emerging markets in the world right now is they have the opportunity to leapfrog and to go directly from polluted energy source from coal or even limited source of power directly into renewable electricity. That means they won't have to invest into more polluting source of electricity. They could go directly into clean electricity and clean up the energy mix. Vietnam understood that really, really well a few years ago, and that's why this government put some really attractive initiative and regulation in place in order to boost up the market. I think we'll see that a little bit later with the presentation of Oliver Mosman. This is obviously a really important thing to keep in mind. Things are not happening if the regulation, if government don't understand what's going on. So it comes from those two factors. It has to be driven from governments and it has to be driven by international companies because they are the big polluter here. So that leads us directly into what's happening in the energy market of Vietnam. So as I just explained, because there is a massive industrialization in the country, Vietnam is becoming one of the biggest manufacturers in the world. I think it already became the biggest garment exporter, and it took over Bangladesh this year or last year. And this trend is obviously growing. Vietnam is signing a lot of free trade agreements. We are celebrating, I think, the 1 year of the European Vietnam free trade agreement. So we're going to see more and more exportation and obviously more and more company coming into Vietnam and moving that supply chain into the country. With that come a huge need of electricity. The Vietnam energy consumption has more than doubled since 2010. It's basically about 10% growth a year. That means that EVN that means that the energy market has to keep up with that pace and has to install the same amount of capacity generation for electricity. The good news is if we do that with renewable, we don't have to add more coal power station into that electricity generation capacity. So that's what Vietnam's been trying to do a lot with solar and with renewable energy in general. You can see in that table that there is a boom, as it's been said before, in solar that happened in 2019 and in 2020. Literally, Vietnam went from having 0 solar plant installed in the country to becoming the 3rd biggest market in the world for solar in only 3 years. So that's incredible. Everyone is looking at Vietnam right now, especially for solar, and everyone is kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with wind. The feed-in tariff for wind are coming in November 2021, and that obviously going to have a massive impact on the capacity installation. That also going to have a massive impact on the grid. As it was mentioned before, there is a massive grid infrastructure capacity problem in this country, and the country needs more and more sources of electricity added, but it also needs a bigger grid because otherwise you generate curtailment. I will come to that a little bit later, but that's kind of the elephant in the room, as it was said by Christopher earlier on. So the power mix by the end of 2020 completely changed, and that's a fantastic news. The government has stopped the development of coal power plants, at least until 2025, if I'm not saying anything wrong. And right now, renewable energy is making up for 25% of the total installed capacity. It's most likely going to be even bigger by 2021, obviously with wind, but because solar is not stopping, rooftop is still coming in. We'll come to what's happening with solar rooftop a bit later. Obviously, the idea this year is to do a bit less into the grid and a bit less into the grid and a bit more self-consumption, but that still mean a lot of solar installed this year. That's obviously made possible because the weather in Vietnam is fantastic. A lot of people in this country are a bit worried about the sun in the north. Don't forget that one of the biggest markets for solar in the world is Germany. They have led the market for many years. There is not less sun in North Vietnam than there is in Germany. That's very similar to Europe, and it's probably even sunnier. So if it can be done in Europe, can definitely be done here too. And the amount of sun that we have in South Vietnam is absolutely fantastic, and that makes solar very, very attractive. So it's important, as I've mentioned before, to talk about what's happening with big international companies in the world globally linked to sustainability and to renewable energy. The biggest one linked to renewable energy is RE100, which is an initiative that many international companies are now joining, where they are committing to use only 100% renewable electricity. That does not involve necessarily their supply chain. Some of them are committed to include their supply chain to it. Some of them don't. And most of the numbers that we see on that table, on that slide, actually don't take the supply chain into account. But we can already see that 42% of the new member of RE100 are located in Asia Pacific region. A lot of Asian companies are joining. It was initially more led by Western companies, it's not the case anymore. And a lot of those big international companies are slowly committed to involve their supply chain, to evolve their manufacturing process. Because as I said before, if we don't involve manufacturing process, it doesn't really make much sense, because most of the carbon emission are coming from manufacturing. A quarter of the carbon emission globally are coming from manufacturing process. So that brings us to what is happening exactly with international company and how they are involving their supply chain. I've put there a few names, but there's a lot more than that. The biggest one that everyone knows that are involving their supply chain, obviously IKEA, Adidas, Apple, they've already committed to it. IKEA is actually offering loans for their suppliers to help them have access to renewable electricity. So I'm sure we're going to see it a lot in Vietnam, because many factories in this country, many of the IKEA suppliers are located in Vietnam, and a lot of them will want a solar rooftop to comply with IKEA's goals. It's really important to understand that those companies are really committed to it, and that means that they will not hesitate to remove their supplier if those suppliers are not following the rules. So in 2021, Standard Chartered Bank did a study amongst the biggest amongst the bigger international companies. 73% of those multinationals that were part of the study say that they would take their supply chain into account, and 78% say that they will remove their suppliers if they are not following the plan by 2025. 15% have already started to do so. So that means that there is already factories in this country that are probably paying the price for not being compliant with what their clients are expecting from them. Over 2/3 of those big multinational companies actually said that involving their supply chain was more important than focusing on their own carbon output. That makes a lot of sense, because their own carbon output, if they don't have their own factories, is probably fairly low comparing to what the supply chain is doing. a lot of those big multinational companies are now measuring the carbon footprint per product instead of actually giving numbers that are related to their own consumption, because people realize it doesn't make much sense. It makes sense to compare directly per product the carbon footprint and the carbon emission related. And if you start doing that, you obviously have to involve supply chain, suppliers, and logistics. So for all of those reasons, and obviously because we had really, really strong, very attractive incentive, really good regulation that have been put in place in Vietnam since 2017, the solar rooftop market absolutely exploded. It started in 2018, but nothing comparable to what happened in 2020. The main reason for that, obviously, it's because of the feed-in tariff that were coming into an end by the end of 2020. So we had a huge rush basically to finish all of the projects. And just as a side note, we can only expect the same is going to happen with wind because the end of the feed-in tariff is coming to an end by November 2021. So to go back to solar rooftop, initially the target set for Vietnam was to build 1 gigawatt by the end of 2025. This country actually installed 9 gigawatts only in 2020. So they far exceeded the original targets. Not only they did it only in 1 year, 4 years in advance, but 7 out of those 9 gigawatts have been installed in November and December. So that really shows that there is a massive demand and there is a very, very strong potential for solar rooftop in this country. Everyone is seeing how attractive that is, especially with the last feed-in tariff that we had. And a lot of companies are actually asking for it. And if you put the right regulation in place, you have crazy growth in installation capacity like that. Obviously, that comes with a few problems. The main one is curtailment. I don't think that was planned to go so quickly and so far in only the course of 1 year. Therefore, there's way too much power coming into the grid on Sundays, during lunchtime, during peak time around noon, for EVN to be able to assimilate, for the grid to be able to assimilate all of that. That's one of the biggest challenges in this country. I will explain a little bit more in the next slide, but that's to give you an idea. So the power development plan has been reworked since then, because obviously what was done before can't be up to date anymore with the kind of development we had last year. It's still on the draft, but basically we are expecting to have at least 17% of the installed capacity to be solar by 2025, so in the next 4 years, and 14% by 2030. So that obviously means there's going to be a lot of other sources. There are going to be winds. Unfortunately, there's still going to be coal, as you can see in the table. But Vietnam has such a strong development, has such a massive need of electricity. The idea is not to remove coal completely altogether, because it will never be there will never be enough electricity. But the idea is to decrease the development of coal and to make sure it doesn't take more space into the energy mix. The idea is to slowly clean up the energy mix. But you can see that we are expecting to get over half of the installation by 2044 to be coming from renewable. So that brings me to challenge and opportunity. So as I was saying before, the biggest challenge in this country for solar is obviously the installation capacity and the grid. It's the grid infrastructure is too weak in the country to support the strong need of electricity that industrialization is generating. And especially with renewable, because you need a very flexible grid if you are to install a lot of solar. The current curtailment in some places, especially where we installed solar plants, I'm not talking about rooftop, but mainly solar farm here, it's reaching 50%. So this is huge. That's the next massive challenge for EVN and MOIT is the grid, but that's also a massive challenge for a private company that want to invest in renewable energy. For that reason, the feed-in tariff stopped, and basically EVN and MOIT are really pushing for self-consumption rooftop now to stop having systems that are installed on the roof for the sole purpose to sell everything into the grid, because the pressure the grid can't handle the pressure anymore. We are expecting a Fit 3 to be announced. We don't know when, we don't know how much. That's obviously one of the big challenge. Obviously, by focusing on self-consumption, we are still able to work. Companies like Shire and a lot of my competitors that I saw in the room are still able to work without the feed-in tariff. But obviously that comes with the challenge that most of the factories, even the retail company, they're gonna stop working on Sundays. You're gonna have at least 1 day a week where you have that power that needs to be re-injected into the grid. And having feed-in tariff is going to decrease the financial pressure on investors. The wind feed-in tariff are coming to an end in November 2021. That's what I said before. So that's obviously gonna have a massive impact on what's happening on the energy market in the country. And based on that, we can only imagine then MOIT is going to modify or adjust the plan for the coming year. And that's definitely going to have an impact on what's happening for solar. The much awaited DPPA pilot program is still pending. We hope we're going to have access to it in 2022. It's really, as I say, much awaited by multinational companies, because all of those companies that have signed up for RE100, that are committed to be net zero carbon free, and that are involving their supply chain cannot do it only with rooftop. So they will want to have access to more renewable, and that means renewable coming off-site. But obviously with renewable coming off-site, you have to use the grid. So we always come back to the same problem, the elephant in the room, that's gonna be needed. Strong investment and improvement on the grid are gonna be necessary, and that takes time. Obviously, having a DPPA is probably going to release the financial pressure from EVN, because we saw a massive boom in solar rooftop in 2020 because the feed-in tariff was so attractive. They were artificially, you might say, high. They were way too high, and that obviously is a risk for EVN, and that is a risk to increase the cost of electricity in this country. So having a DPPA means you're going to have private off-takers that are going to be paying for that renewable instead of putting that pressure onto EVN. And now that brings me to the very last slide and what we are doing. So Shire, as a renewable energy developer, is focusing mainly on solar rooftop in Vietnam, because this is the best opportunity that we have now to accompany our client into their sustainability journey. So basically what we are trying to do, our goal is to help organizations, international companies to achieve net zero emission, to achieve carbon neutral operation. It's also to show that a cleaner manufacturing industry is possible. For that, some of the big international companies and some of the big international Dutch companies are leading the way. I'm thinking, for example, of Heineken, that is definitely showing that a cleaner manufacturing industry is possible. I hope we see that more and more. And obviously we are also, our goal is also to provide a reliable investment platform for energy transition investor. We're really trying to show that finance and sustainability are not antinomic, that you can make profit without polluting and without making our world a worse place than it is now, and lowering your impact in the environment. So the main solution for solar rooftop in this country are obviously self-investments. This is really classic. I mentioned it earlier in the presentation that for smaller companies, some of the big international clients are providing loans to help them. Big international company might obviously be able to just provide the cash flow or have the loan from the bank. It's a lot easier to have access to investment for them. For smaller company or for company that just want to focus their investment on something else, focusing on their production, investing in their core business, the power purchase agreement, PPA, and what Shire is doing is the second obvious solution. So what we are basically doing is offering long-term contract, 15 to 20 years usually, where we build the system, we invest 100%, so there is no cost at all for the factory. And we are bringing the technical knowledge and all of the paperwork and authorization that might come with solar installation. And we sell the power generated from the roof back to the factory at a cheaper price. So we are giving clean electricity to this company, and we are also giving them cheap electricity in a country where the cost of electricity is increasing every year, about 5 to 6% per year. We are in charge of the operation and maintenance of the system, taking care of everything, cleaning the system and repairing in case of problems. So the idea is really for factories to not have to worry at all about the system for the next 15 to 20 years. And at the end of the contract, we just give them the system for a token fee, 100,000 Vietnamese dong, which is basically about $3 to $4, I think. So basically just for free. And they can use the electricity generated after that for at least another 10 years, completely free, obviously. Companies in the South can save tens of thousands of USD by using this kind of agreement, with using PPA, with working with company like Shire International, and that's about 1.8 million USD that are saved just over the contract term in electricity costs. That is it for me, yeah. So I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clotilde. Thank you for your excellent presentation. You managed to dive into the deep while not losing the interest of the audience. It's a very detailed presentation, and I thought it was very insightful. A question from my side on this inability from EVN to adopt all the electricity. There is about 2/3 of the electricity that is now renewably won is not put on the EVN grid. That's about the ratio, right?
Sorry, say that ratio again, I didn't understand.
So what I mean is that there is a lot of renewable energy won, let's say 15 gigawatts per year, and EVN can only accept 5 gigawatts per year, right?
Let me go back to my numbers to make sure I don't say anything wrong. Yeah. You are talking about the curtailment, right?
And what I wanted to understand is what happens to energy that is not put on that grid? Is that in some way saved, or is that lost? And how does that go? Where does it go?
It's lost. It's if it cannot go into the grid, that's just lost. It's just a waste. The obvious solution it's let's say the short-term solution would be to add battery. Unfortunately, in the country, it's not. It doesn't make financial sense because batteries are still very expensive and the cost of electricity in Vietnam is fairly low. But that would be the obvious short-term solution for that great capacity problem.
Understood. Okay, well, thanks for clarifying that. There are a few questions, some questions that were asked before the webinar, and also some questions during your presentation. I'm trying to make a selection of the questions. You can also check them yourselves. What I want to prevent from happening is that we get into a very detailed discussion amongst experts. That's not what the presentation is for. The presentation is to display the challenges and opportunities. And as such, I think the question of VOO is very good. Is Shire still able to build projects this year?
Yeah, definitely. You can operate without feed-in tariff, so that's what I said earlier. We are focusing on self-consumption, so we are finding factories that, or that can, I say factories, but that can also be warehouses or retail company that have a very strong needs of electricity, and we match the capacity of our system with their need. Most of the time, you're gonna have what we call the overspill. You're gonna have a surplus of electricity that come on Sundays. That's the classic one, or that could come during lunch break when the sun's really high and you generate a lot of power. That can still go into the grid. We just don't receive any money for it yet. We hope that in the future we will, for projects that were built this year. Or that will be built in the future, but we're not waiting for feed-in tariff to build, definitely not. We are currently building in the north because we can, in the south obviously installation are not possible at the moment, but Shire has a very strong objective for 2021, so we're not waiting.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for highlighting that. Open for business, as they say. I'm skipping the question of Mai Lin, which I think is righteous, but it would be maybe a bit too detailed. And the question of Dietmar is, solar and wind energy power plants are unable to create a basic grid load. What is the solution from Shire Oak to compensate that missing?
Is the question financially, or is the question related to how do we do?
I think it's hardware. Yeah, I think he's talking about the hardware.
Is talking about what? Sorry, excuse me.
I think he's talking about hardware. Hey, he's talking. I think about
hardware is what I mentioned earlier. It's storage system. So it's let's say it's under development. A lot of people are talking about it and are thinking about it in Vietnam. As far as I know, for solar at least, that's not really a thing. For rooftop, that's not very attractive. The solution to release the pressure on the grid is to build rooftop for self-consumption, with the idea of not selling to the grid, or to sell a very, very minimum amount of electricity into the grid. Therefore, you don't need to operate with EVN, and you are a massive release to EVN. You generate the power where it's needed. You don't need infrastructure. Yeah,
okay, clear. Last question before we move to the next speaker, and there have been a few more questions that we will ask to the whole panel. But the last question is about the north of Vietnam and whether that is suitable for renewable energy, or is it just the south that we are talking about?
No, it's this question is for me, right, Guido? Sorry.
Yeah, that's for you, correct? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to jump or talk too much. No. So I mentioned it at the beginning of my presentation. That came up a lot when you are talking to big international companies, especially the one that have production sites in the south and in the north. They would say, no, we don't do the north because it's not attractive. It is definitely attractive. Renewable energy, well, solar makes sense in the entire country. Obviously, the sun is different and you need to adapt your model. You generate less electricity, therefore you generate less profits for the same system. That means in our case, Shire Oak as an investor, we're gonna, the pricing is going to be different in the north, but as long as you adapt that, it makes sense. And it still generates a lot of profit for Shire Oak, and for the factory, there's still a lot of savings.
Yeah, okay. So it's, in summary, it's still possible, but the opportunity is slightly less due to the weather conditions.
Let's say, yes, that's correct. It's still, we are still talking about dozens of USD save every year in the north, definitely. So don't get me wrong, it's still very attractive.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, a last question that's coming from Ms. Jib. I know her very well. She's part of our board of directors. Her question is this system that you're talking about, the solar panels, is it still working after 15 or 20 years? And after you sell the system to, for example, one of your customers, what's the cost for maintenance for them?
So the system can definitely be used a lot more than 15 to 20 years, especially when you are working with a developer like Shire, because they're going to be doing the operation and maintenance for you for the contract term. Therefore, they make sure that your system is well maintained and is going to be performing for a very long time. Just to give you a clear idea of the actual panels, they have a manufacturer warranty of 25 years. So you sign a contract with Shire for 20 years. At the end of that, we transfer you the warranty from the manufacturer. So if anything happens, you're still gonna have the manufacturer taking care of your system, of your solar panel. Obviously, operation and maintenance is an important part, is an important thing to do at the end of the contract with Shire. Usually, client can decide to do it themselves if they have a strong technical team, if they know what they are doing. Or they can just use a third-party company. They can use a company like Shire. There's many companies in the market doing that. We say that it costs about 4,000 to 5,000 USD per megawatt per year. So this is a fairly low cost, especially that you are going to be generating power for free because that becomes your system. So, you know, the ratio is really, really low comparing to how much money you'll be saving. I'm giving you the cost of as of today. Obviously, I don't really know how much it's going to be costing in 20 years, but we can only assume it's going to be in that area.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Clotilde. And that is a very complete answer to Ms. Chip's question, I think. We're going to move on. Thank you for your presentation. And the next person that we have is Dr. Oliver Mosman. He is an international attorney at law, certified financial accountant and auditor, and partner at Duane Morris. Besides that, Oliver is a true pioneer, I can say that, I think, in the field of solar energy and renewable energy as such. And you have a thing or two to share about the legal side of things. Is that right, Oliver?
Yes, that's right. That's right, Guido. Thank you very much. I want just to address our Vietnamese audience here. Of course, I've worked in Vietnam since 25 years as a lawyer, and I speak absolutely fluent Vietnamese. But one thing I want to add to the question from Dr. Dietmar Gens. We talked a little bit about, we talked a lot about renewable energy, but baseload is critical for a country with a development here in Vietnam now, and baseload, and that is true. Full capacity baseload cannot achieved by wind, it cannot achieve by solar under the current circumstances. Clotilde basically mentioned that. But one point is the Vietnamese government is fully aware of that baseload cannot be satisfied fully by renewable energy. So they're creating basically a system of LNG, liquefied natural gas import. And I'm working currently on project volume for these liquefied natural gas import projects of about $10 billion. So I have 3 deals and this will come for sure. So there will be an LNG import and an LNG regasification infrastructure in the next years to come. And that will gradually, of course it takes time, but it will gradually replace coal. That is the hope of the Vietnamese, not short term, but mid and definitely long term. So that is the answer. I hope Dr. Dietmar Gens is happy with it. Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, let me go through my presentation. So it's about Vietnam solar power projects, how to get deals done. Can somebody run it for me again? Okay, so my agenda is an energy sector overview. I will give you an overview. Where is Vietnam standing now? What is the energy? What is the energy situation and potential of renewable energy in Vietnam? Clotilde has mentioned that already. It's absolutely stunning. Let me say like that. The development. We currently, while we are talking, we are currently having here an installed capacity of renewable energy solar sector 17 gigawatt. That's more than 3 nuclear power plants, and that has been done in 4 years. So yes, definitely and the current government policy on solar energy, I will tell you definitely what is the government's policy. I will also comment a little bit about nitty-gritty parts between EVN, Electricity Vietnam, and the MOIT, Ministry of Industry and Trade. And what I will give you also is I will give you a tool where you can achieve better negotiation, better grade of project documents, and with EVN. And that is absolutely critical. Next point is investment guidelines for foreign investors. What you should do step by step. I run you through the project and my recommendations. Here, next slide. Okay, so the what you can take out of this slide, energy sector background is basically short-term and mid-term. Vietnam is facing a critical energy crisis, and you have to understand Vietnam has signed two major trade agreements: the CPTPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the Free Trade Agreement. I'm also the lead advisor for the European Commission in Brussels for the Free Trade Agreement between European and Vietnam. And just let me tell you one number. According to the World Economic Forum, alone, the free trade agreement between Europe and Vietnam will add four base points to the past COVID Vietnam's GDP, and we're talking about from 2025 onwards for Vietnam growing double-digit because of the free trade agreements it has signed. Or Clotilde mentioned, it will be an export star, so it needs baseload. That's absolutely critical. And that's where the LNG comes in. So current government's policies on solar energy here. By the end of 2020, the total solar power capacity put into operation was about 17 gigawatt. I mentioned that one of the fastest growing solar capacities in the world. But of course, the elephant in the room, Clotilde has mentioned it, here transmission grids are not enough in quantity. Let me give you a little bit a detail that you understand. Historically, Vietnam had one grid from north to the south, 2,000 kilometers, and about 50 feed-in points, 50 feed-in points into the grid, that was all. And now, just to give you an imagination and give you an idea, basically, now they have still the old grid, and they have from the middle to the south 400 additional feed-in points. I'm talking about 400. So that's the reason why nobody is to blame. It's a technical stuff. They have to get the grid upgraded here, and it costs $1 billion. So this is a problem. Binh Thuan here. Wait, let me go through that. Okay. Binh Thuan and Nic Thuan provinces are here the top two provinces where projects are being applied for inclusion in the Power Master Plan project. This is due to the provinces' geographical advantage. They have the highest solar output. Next slide. Okay, so one of my points, we are working since 2 years on the DPPA, the Direct Power Purchase Agreement. This is underway. What does it mean? And if you want to be included, let me give you one tip. The application procedure will probably start after TED 2022. There will be a limit of about 1 gigawatt of DPPAs, but you will be, once you have been approved on it, you will be eligible to produce power and directly contract with the end consumer to sell power. And you can negotiate the PPA with the end user, not anymore with EVN. Ladies and gentlemen, if you take anything out of my presentation here from the legal side, it's very critical. The power monopoly, the offtake monopoly of EVN is phasing out. And this creates somehow a vacuum. So there the direct power purchase agreement comes in. So you can basically replace EVN as the only offtaker. EVN is now the only offtaker for grid projects and will not be anymore after 2024, according to PDP Power Development Plan 8. So this is very critical. The pilot is to be implemented nationwide with a total capacity starting at 1 gigawatt maximum, and the nominal capacity for each project must be about 30 megawatt. come to me. We include you. We can include you. Help you to include you in the application plan. The project must be already included in the national development plan. There you see, you have to start early to get it done. Is it possible? Yes, you can still include it now. And the developer must already have a binding principal agreement with the consumer to sell electricity. Next slide. Benefits of the direct power purchase agreement mechanism here. You can impose take or pay obligations on off-takers, thus guarantee developers revenue stream, and fixed electricity power purchase price regardless of status of national legislation, flexible calculation of monthly exchange rate, and increase consumers' environmental commitments, since only consumers with renewable energy users commitments can participate in the pilot project. Next slide. So selection criteria for electricity generators to join this pilot scheme is you have to have a committed COD deadline of the whole power plant of no more than 270 working days since the date of announcement on the plan being selected to participate in the project. So it depends on your application, or having written documents of financial institutions on the financing for the power plant. The generation company must submit a bid to the systems and market operator for the direct power purchase and payment of electricity with the energy buyer. We can assist you with its structure. Now, my investment guidelines for foreign investors. Next slide. Here, rooftop solar projects. Electricity buyer can either be Electricity Vietnam or an authorized representative of EVN. How to become an authorized representative of the EVN? You have to fulfill certain conditions, and you have to apply for that. We have currently on the application list, we have 58 companies to be authorized representatives. We are working on this now. In case system is not connected, the rooftop solar system is not connected to the EVN's power grids, organization, individuals purchasing electricity from the seller, rooftop solar developer, or an authorized representative of such organization and individuals. So you can do off-grid rooftop projects, you have to be an authorized representative. In case the buyer is EVN, the end user still, the seller and buyer must sign the standard power purchase agreement unless agreed otherwise. Ladies and gentlemen, if you take anything out of my presentation, do not agree with the standard power purchase agreement. If you go utility, I have done 12 solar power projects utility scale, meaning under the Vietnamese law, there's no threshold for utility scale for solar, but it is a de facto threshold, and the de facto threshold is 50 megawatt, because above 50 megawatt, the Prime Minister is in charge. Would be large mistake, huge mistake in the last 4 years, what many investors did, and so put it below this 50 megawatt threshold, because you have no leverage. If you have a 100 megawatt project, 100 megawatt project, you can go to the Prime Minister and your Prime Minister's office. You can talk. We did that, and we say, hey, we want to change the standard PPA. 2-3 sentences we want to change. And I can tell you, we put a change in law clause directly referring to the investment protection agreement between the EU and Vietnam in these agreements. Ladies and gentlemen, if later curtailment comes, EVN will summon its legal department and will see what are the weakest project documents, and it will not be ours. This is key for such projects for bankability. The seller and other independent investment guidelines for foreign investors. Okay, yes, the seller and other independent buyers can discuss and agree on the order of implementation, installation, connection, maintenance, and so on for rooftop solar project. Next slide. So my investment guidelines in the context of ASEAN, because I'm doing also projects in Indonesia, Myanmar, and Philippines. Vietnam has super advantages. Vietnam has one of the most liberalized WTO market access service sector commitments, meaning you have no foreign ownership restrictions. You're going to go 100% foreign owned. In the Philippines, for example, maximum you have 40%. It's a disaster. Investment forms here, wholly foreign and enterprise. You can do. I would set up a simple structure, as simple as possible. Keep in mind this. Keep it simple and sexy. That's it for the project. Straightforward. LLC, a joint venture company between Vietnam, a foreign investor and domestic investor. You can have that too, but I mean, based on my 25 years experience in Vietnam, it's always Either you give them 5%, 10% to get them into the boat, that's also okay, but not 50-50. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. Investment pursuant to the BOT legal framework. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very key if you go utility scale. Use the public-private partnership BOT legal framework. Make use of it. It's very helpful. And I helped to develop such a law with the Economic Committee of the National Assembly. Let me know if you need more details on the BOT structure for utility scale projects. Remember, just remember, historically, the most successful power development projects, power generation projects were FUMI 2.2 in power, in operation since about 15 years, FUMI 3, and those were both BOT financed gas-fired power plants. Monsoon 2, although it's a coal-fired power plants. But what I want to tell you, my point is that all these successful projects are BOT. So if you do future project on utility scale, please make use of build, operate, transfer PPP legal framework. Thank you. So through the purchase of shares in either an EVN subsidiary being or having been equitized or private IPP holding power assets, we could think about it. I mean, if EVN and its subsidiaries open for investment, a majority stake could be interesting. For a majority stake, you need PM approval, Prime Minister approval. I know it is difficult, but better not go for minority. Next slide. So my recommendation for investors here, I have one actual recommendation for you, for all of you, also for Shire and for all of you who are investors in Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm working in Vietnam since more than 20 years. I have a lot of contacts to Electricity Vietnam and those guys who have worked 20, 30 years as engineers in the department, in the marketing department of EVN. And this department is allocated by MOIT to do a negotiation for the PPAs. So these guys, they are retired now, but they're very keen to work. You can put them on your payroll. These guys from Electricity Vietnam, they know everything. They do all the legal work. I've done that for a lot of clients, for me now, for 6 clients now. They have these guys, they hired each one, you only need one. And each one of these EVN guys, and they do all the legwork, and it's a recipe for success. If you have such a retired EVN guy, EVN engineer in your team to negotiate, that makes the day. So my final recommendations for investors: use the BOT, use the public-private partnership. I'm talking about utility scale here. And due care, please take due care on negotiations of the PPA. Don't give up. Stay course. If you go utility scale, try to amend it. Have I done it? Yes. I'm working on the largest offshore wind energy power plant. I'm allowed to tell this here now, Kamau. Here it's the largest intertidal wind energy power plant, and we got a lot of free leeway to negotiate the PPA. Here it's a $1.5 billion project, so don't give up. And electricity selling in off-grid areas can be a good choice for projects. There must be a sound financing structure, good business model, great legal assistance, of course, come to us. Accurate prediction of where the market is heading to in the context of Vietnam's critical power shortage should be considered. So if you go baseload, if you are a baseload investor, basically, then we'll forget coal. But LNG is a super opportunity. Liquefied natural gas. Please let us put, as a foreign investor group, more pressure on the government to adequately address key issues on tariff increase, demonopolization of the power market, and government guarantee. It's all underway. You know what I told you. Demonopolization, Vietnam will lose its monopoly, off-take monopoly, latest end of 2024. So be part of this time development and make use of the market. Vietnam's market is extremely in need of financing and EPC, equipment procurement contract capability. There are rooms for cost-effective and high quality EPC contractors and resourceful lenders. So it's absolutely critical. I myself have done some of the largest financing deals for FMO. We also got awarded FMO the Netherlands equivalent to DEG. So it's a huge chance. And in many cases, you can test the waters with small power plant projects. But please remember, never forget, stay above utility scale. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. So come on,
Fantastic presentation, Oliver, and it's so much information, but it's very compact, well presented, and the best advice that people that you can probably give people is when they start an energy project to contact you, and that is possible through the contact details that you are displaying right here. I'm going to fire. Yeah, I'm going to fire 2 questions at you before we line up the whole panel. There's 7 minutes left, so please keep it short. That's always the disadvantage of the final speaker. Let me see. A question to ask: what is a financing option, the most straightforward financing option for solar power projects? You've already highlighted it, but can you reproduce, please?
Well, you mean rooftop or ground mounted?
Solar power projects.
So all together, rooftop.
Yeah, well, let's say, yeah.
What does he want to know? I mean, you need a bankable agreement. So the absolutely critical point is for financing that you have to have a bankability in your PPA, power purchase agreement, and then you can do direct financing. You can also do. I mean, based on my experience, I think it would make sense. This is a very specific question. It would make sense to go with the financing of a local state-owned bank. Why? Because those. This is an internal information, and ladies and gentlemen, don't quote me on that. But this is an internal tip. Okay, those government officials in the state-owned banks like Vietcombank or Vietcombank, they are subject to very harsh thresholds for deciding whether a car project is commercially viable. And every decision they make, which basically leads to damages more than $300,000, is subject to death penalty. You get a shock, I know. But if you go to these companies and they are in your boat, they will make sure that you have a bankable PPA because they don't want to let the project die. Yeah. And this is a very technical, this is a very internal advice that I give you. So it is super, super good if you have local state-owned banks as a co-financer. So far for financing, I think that would be the best solution. Now, yes, you will say interest rates are very high and so on, but I mean, if you calculate the risk to having a non-bankable PPA, and a lot of companies have now a non-bankable PPA, versus to have a state-owned enterprise bank in your boat, I would take the latter. So this is a key financing. Go to local banks.
Clear. Well, that's a great internal insight. The insight is if you're looking for financing for your renewable energy project, go to one of the state-owned banks because they will make sure that the bankability is arranged.
An automatism. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Very pragmatic solution. And these will be things that people will be thanking you for once everything is said and done. Yeah, fantastic. Very good. I see on the clock with about 100 viewers, I want to land the plane on time. So let's make sure that we get the spotlights on all the speakers. Clotilde, Chris, Christophe, team can help me out with that. And I'm going to select a question and then let's see who is willing to take that up. So for your presentation, Oliver, thank you very much, but please stay tuned because maybe you can help with the question. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, very welcome, very welcome. Let's start with an easy one and let's keep it short. How many years is the solar energy market in Vietnam still of high potential? Hands up if you want to answer it, please.
How many years?
How many years do you think that the renewable energy market and deploying solar systems will still, is there a window of opportunity, or can people step in today, but also in 10 years? Let's put it differently. Why should people step in today? Oliver.
Look, there's a transition period. As Clotilde mentioned already, the FIT feed-in tariff phasing out. We will have the bidding tender process coming. If you are a competitive investor, you can compete. I would say the sky is the limit. Remember, Vietnam will be in the next decades to come, 2 decades to come, one of the fastest growing, economically, one of the fastest growing countries on this planet. That is due to TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. That is to EVFTA, Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, and the IPA, Investment Protection Agreement. So I think for the next 20 years, Vietnam, it is a very good place to do. You have to understand one thing also. Vietnam has one of the most liberalized WTO market access service sector commitments. So this is super critical for foreign investors. In some other countries like Indonesia, Philippines, or so, you cannot invest like you can invest in Vietnam. So bottom line answer is, for me, Vietnam, at least after the phase out of the EVFTA, which will be in 20 years, and the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, CPTPP, which will all be roughly in 20 years, I think that's a place to go.
Okay, thank you, Oliver, and thanks for pointing that out. I have been going through the list of questions that have been asked prior to the webinar, but it's difficult to find one question that really stands out because most of it has already been treated has already been discussed during the webinar. So may I propose that we do a final round of, let's say, some final thoughts from all of your side. Maybe we use the sequence of speakers. So Christophe, thanks, great that you're still around. Do you have some final remarks for the audience after hearing all this?
No, I think that actually I'm energized by the webinar, because it clearly demonstrates that energy transition is happening. And yes, there are challenges, and yes, there are hurdles, and there are elephants in the room. But the fact that so many joined us today and that the pace of the transition in Vietnam is so high gives me hope. And I hope it gives you energy to get moving and to start making your own plans with the help of some of the speakers here in this webinar, or maybe with the help of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. Thank you very much.
Great roundup, Christophe, and thank you for joining and shining your light on this renewable energy matter. Chris, over to you. I'm asking to unmute. Yeah.
I thought the presentations of everyone were really spot on, very, very insightful, very excellent. I'd like to remind the attendees that we will respond to any questions they have by email, and that we will come back to them. For my topic, it's very simple. Make sure that whoever you're going to deal with know who your counterpart is, and make sure that they're serious people who know the background of the business from mature markets, not only from Vietnam, because everything is extremely dynamic in Vietnam, and we really have to look forward, as Oliver did, as Clotilde did, as Christophe did. We really have to understand the dynamics of this market and apply the knowledge that we have learned in the mature markets. And for that, you need reliable investors.
Clear. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining us. Clotilde, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just as a last word, I definitely agree with Christophe Prommersberger. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, sorry.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
But Christophe is enough. Thank you.
Okay, Christophe. It's been proven that the world has enough resources to produce what we need in electricity 100 times over what we actually need. There are some countries in the world that are actually an overcapacity comparing to their need. Vietnam is one of those countries. It has a huge electricity need, but it obviously also has a huge capacity for renewable energy because it has so much sun and so much coast, so much potential for wind. So I agree with what Oliver said earlier. I think the market is changing. There's definitely a new phase that is about to start when the feed-in tariffs are going to stop. But because it's such an attractive market for investors, it's such an attractive market for companies to move on their supply chain, their suppliers, and all of those big companies will want renewable. I don't think it's going to stop. I think this is going to be a market for the next 10, 15 years. It's going to change, but it's still going to be there.
Thank you, Clotilde. Thank you for shining your light and the excellent presentation earlier. Oliver, your final thoughts.
I said it already, but let me say it again. One of the youngest generation on this planet, 100 million people, demographics, average age 30 years old. Vietnam is one of the country that is on the highest level of international integration with its free trade agreements, with its investment protection agreement. So this will be an automatism. It will be a no-brainer that Vietnam will be one of the leading countries in the decade to come in Southeast Asia. They have only one problem. Tham nhũng. And I want to make it clear, and I'm not only showing the pink heaven. Tham nhũng means corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, and I don't want to make it always pink heaven. There must be also a slight reminder.
Sure.
And the reminder should be, ladies and gentlemen, what are they doing with the vaccine investment fund? They have collected more than $400 million in the vaccine investment fund, and they are not moving. They have to move. Vietnam is moving from a first fighter of COVID and Corona hero into shambles now, into shambles. And so if there's the Vietnamese community, and if the Vietnamese community of this audience here can deliver some message, and this is a message, get going with the vaccination, improve that. Situation is unacceptable. People are dying, and now more and more and more. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, first things first, it's health first, and then the rest. That is indeed entirely up to you. I think that mentioning that is, well, yeah, that is besides the topic, but I think everything that is there to be said about solar has been said. There are also interesting other opportunities, things that we have not discussed. For example, Joost Starmans spoke about the opportunities of hydro. How can Vietnam has produced capabilities, but has the government now updated their renewable energy goals? It certainly seems so. There are so many other things to cover. But let's start at where we are now. There have been many questions have been answered. Some questions have remained unanswered. We will work together as a group to answer those questions and send emails to the people that have asked them. So let that be very clear. We are going to continue with that. Secondly, what I would like to do is thank all the speakers. Thank you for your collaboration, not only during this webinar, but also before that. There is plenty of preparation has gone into this webinar. So thanks to Shire, Dwayne Morris, and the business chambers. And last but definitely not least, the Dutch Embassy for participating. When it comes to next month, doing business and investing in Vietnam is a monthly returning webinar. We do that every 4, 5, 6 weeks or so. And there are so many interesting topics to cover. Usually I get to sort of decide and I come up with a topic and then I find speakers with that. If you are listening in and you're thinking, hey, I'm a DBAV member, my industry has not been handled yet in the first 3 episodes. Let's collaborate and let's do something together. You can see that our reach is okay. We have about 100 interesting viewers. Most of them are DBAV members. are high up, so there is a lot of reason to connect with us, and to discuss potential topics for a webinar. Together we make each other smarter. We connect and inform each other. With that, that is actually the last thing I wanted to say. There will be a post-tweet coming up with all the information for you once again.
One thing, allow me to mention, one thing. I just get the feedback on LinkedIn now from my contacts here on the whole presentation. It is excellent.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks. Great. Thanks for acknowledging that. Moving on to next month, we have a whole program of things. Become a member of DBAV if you are not a member yet. If you're already with another chamber, then it's actually cheaper to become a member of us. So I hope to receive your admissions in great numbers. Okay, that's that. Thanks to everyone for joining, and have a nice day all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Thank you.
Tot ziens.
Bye-bye. Tot ziens.